Hello.
Is that my guy?
Yep.
What's up, Noah?
Not much. How are you?
I'm good. I got my office all duded up just for this interview. I feel like a Sports Center guest and everything.
Well, yeah, thank you for doing this. Do you know much about my background, or do I need to kind of tell you about it a bit?
No, listen, I'm a sportscaster by trade, so I did my research just like I was getting ready for a game. I know as much about you as I do my 13-year-old daughter.
Well, thank you for doing your research. I really appreciate you doing this, and yeah, let's get right to the interview.
Awesome. I'm ready.
So, I'm going to start off here with when did you realize you wanted to be a sportscaster?
Oh man, Noah, I feel like it's the only job that I ever really wanted to do. I always joke around in my family that I was born with a microphone in my hand. I just didn't know how I was going to use that microphone. And then around the time I was your age, I realized that I was never going to be 6'6". I was never going to run fast. I was never going to throw a 97 mile an hour fastball. And once that dream that a lot of us have of being a professional sports athlete hit the wall of reality when I started to go through my formative teenage years, I said, what's the next best thing? How can I stay close to sports? And that's kind of when I decided, right around 13, 14 years old, that sportscasting was realistic for me. I went to a sleepaway camp that was right near a very well-regarded basketball camp called Five Star Basketball Camp. It's located in the mountains in Pennsylvania, and we used to get professional players to come to our camp and do demonstrations and clinics and things like that. And one of the counselors spent a lot of time at Syracuse. And I buddied up to this guy. His name is Gary Barnaba. To this day, Gary sits right behind Syracuse's bench at every home game of the Carrier Dome. And so my love of sports, his knowledge of Syracuse, kind of one summer back in the early to mid 80s kind of meshed. And I became a huge Syracuse fan. And that's when I found out that Syracuse not only was a great school for basketball, it was a great school for broadcasting. And so ever since at that point, I feel like my track was pretty much set with what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go.
Yeah, and you're actually wearing a Syracuse shirt right now. Saw that in my research. Saw you went to Syracuse. How did that help shape you into the broadcaster you are today?
Dude, first of all, I have three children. One is a little bit younger than you, one's about your age, and one's a little older than you. And I live in Florida. I've lived here for 25 years. Unless my children said they wanted to follow in my footsteps, I can't recommend going to Syracuse to spend all year in frigid temperatures with snow up to your eyeballs and all that stuff. But all kidding aside, it was everything to me, and still to this day is everything to me. There's a group of us that is widely known in our circle as the Newhouse Mafia. Newhouse is the communication school at Syracuse, and we call ourselves the Newhouse Mafia. Once you get into Syracuse and matriculate in the Newhouse school and then graduate, you officially are part of that family. And we all look out for each other. We all are friends with each other, even if we don't know each other. But all I have to do is go up to anybody, whether it's Bob Costas or Marv Albert, or the list goes on and on and on, and introduce myself and then tag it with, I also went to the Newhouse School at Syracuse. It's an instant bond that can't be taken away. And that has helped me all throughout my 20 plus years in sportscasting. And truly, it literally helped me get my first two jobs in television all the way back to the mid 90s.
So, what was your first big break as a sportscaster?
My biggest break was probably, I mean, honestly, it was my first job in television. I was working for the Associated Press, living in New York City, and it was a great job. A lot of great learning went on there for me, but it wasn't in front of a camera, and it wasn't for sports. But it paid me enough that I could live with a couple of roommates in New York City, so it helped me move out of my house and start acting like a real adult after college. But then I got a call, going back to my story about Syracuse, from a professor of mine that I kept in touch with. And he said, one of your colleagues, one of your fellow graduates, is working as a reporter in Great Falls, Montana for the ABC station. I know you're looking for a job in TV. They're looking for a sportscaster. Are you interested in that job? And what I tell all young aspiring students and young journalists like yourself is just say yes. Any opportunity that you have to practice, to get better at your craft, just say yes to it. So I did, and I moved out to Great Falls, Montana, sight unseen. So I would think that that's probably my biggest break to this day, because if you don't get that first step, you're never going to get your second step and your third step and so on. So that was back in 1994, and I've been in front of a TV camera ever since then.
So in 2009, you got the job with ESPN. Just walk us through the moment when they called you and told you that you got the job, you're now part of ESPN.
Well, it's really cool, Noah. I mean, everyone's got a great story, right? Your story is going to be sensational. It already is. Everyone has their own individual story. But mine, I would tend to think that mine is a little more circuitous and maybe a little more unique than some people. What happened with me was I was working down here in the Tampa Bay area as the sports director of a cable station. I was making very little money. I was doing all my own work. I was a one-man band, as they call it. I would shoot my own highlights. I would go back, I would edit it. I was doing multiple shows across high school and minor leagues and indoor soccer and arena football, plus covering the local professional teams like the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then when the Rays came into existence a couple of years after that in 1998, because I was making so little money, I was able to do some freelance jobs with ESPN. So I was actually doing things for ESPN before I got my start with them 10 years ago in college basketball. But those jobs were freelance jobs, and they were very, very fringe, if you will. It was before the X Games, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but it was X Games sports. It was dirt bike jumping. It was BMX racing. It was powerboat racing. It was all these things, but it was still airing on ESPN. But when 2009 came along, I was out of the sports business, and I had rolled the dice and left a full-time job at Home Shopping Network, if you can believe that, where I was covering sports for them, but not in the way that I really wanted to. I left that job and kind of bet on myself that I'd be able to get a job full-time in sportscasting, and went up to ESPN studios and offices in Bristol, Connecticut, and met with their head talent administrator, who also went to Syracuse, as luck would have it. And she said to me, there are some things happening with ESPN that we might be able to find you some work, especially because you live in the South. So I said, okay, I'll be ready when that phone call comes. And then that phone call came by a gentleman by the name of Chris Farrow, who was my boss for the better part of the last 10 years, no longer with ESPN, but still a good friend. And he said, do you call college basketball games? And I said, yes, which was a flat out lie, because I hadn't called college basketball games. I had called high school basketball games, but never college. But he said, send me a tape. So what I did was I faked a college basketball game. I used my resources that I had from my couple of years working down here. And I had a friend of mine who was writing at the time for ESPN.com on the basketball side, and he lives here. And he and I got in front of a camera and basically faked an open on camera, which is when you see, when you're a fan, you're watching a TV game, and you see the announcers come on camera, kind of set up the game. We did that in front of a camera, but it was in a studio. And then I literally used the first half of a basketball game that had taken place the year before, and basically we announced that game as if it was happening live. sent that tape to Chris Farrow at ESPN, and then that was during the summer. And then later that fall, I got a call, are you available on Thanksgiving Day? And so, again, going back to just say yes, I said, of course I'm available on Thanksgiving Day. And I drove over to Orlando, and I called 2 games at what the time was the Old Spice tournament. It had since changed to Advocare, and now it's just the Orlando Invitational. But those were my first 2 games that I got on ESPN. And he said, all right, we'll be in touch if we need you. And later that year, I got a few more games, and 7 games turned into 20 games the following season and 25 games after that. And luckily, I've been on that path ever since.
So, what is it like being able to announce college basketball?
It is such a thrill. Someone once told me, and this kind of goes back to actors use this adage all the time too, but I use it for sportscasting. There are no small games, only small sportscasters. And I never want to be a small sportscaster. I treat every game like it's the Final Four. And when I started, it was a little bit of a shock to me because I was in conferences that I had never heard of, announcing college basketball games for teams and players and coaches that I had never heard of. I started in conferences like the Ohio Valley Conference and the MEAC Conference and things like that, the SWAC, which everyone has to pay their dues, and that's where I started paying my dues. And luckily, you put your nose to the grindstone and you do your work and you treat every game as seriously and with as much respect as you would if it was a major conference. And it's getting those reps and treating those games like they're the biggest games on your schedule. Then you get to the point where the right people are going to notice. And so calling college basketball for me has been an absolute thrill. I love being on the campuses. I love talking to the coaches and to the players. And the one thing I'll say, because I've never had the experience of announcing a professional basketball game, although I've covered NBA through the years in different capacities, they're a lot more available and accessible and open than maybe they are on a professional basis. And so there you get more access and you get to know these people a little bit more than you might if you're on the NBA beat. Listen, I would love to call NBA games if that opportunity ever arose, but calling back college basketball makes me feel young. It brings me back to my days in college. So I have cherished every opportunity, whether it's in Itabena, Mississippi, covering Mississippi Valley State, or the colleges that I get to visit now, like Kansas and Texas and Iowa State, which I know you might be a little more familiar with since you're from the state of Iowa. But any of those major schools in the major conferences that I call, I treat them the same way as I did when I was calling college basketball for smaller conferences back in the day.
And what is it like working as a studio host for the Tampa Bay Rays?
It is so fun to be part of a team, and that's truly how I feel. And I can only assume, and speaking with colleagues and friends who have jobs like mine with other teams, I know you've talked to Len Casper. I don't know Len that well, but Boog Shambi and I work together at ESPN. We don't see each other a lot because we're always in different sites and different venues and things like that. But John's a friend. Being part of a team is a really, really special feeling. Getting to kind of get entrenched with one particular team, in this case, the Tampa Bay Rays, and get to know the players and the coaches. And there's a lot of turnover in professional sports. So sometimes these guys are only with us for a season or 2 or 3. But even then, it's great for 162 games to feel like you're part of one entity. Working for ESPN is a dream come true, and I hope to keep doing that for as long as they'll have me. But being part of a team is really special, and that's how I feel it is as the studio host for the Tampa Bay Rays. Like I said, getting to travel with the team part of the time is really awesome too. That's when you really get to know the players because you're staying in the hotel with them, you're on team flights with them, you're in quote unquote enemy territory with them. As a matter of fact, I shared this with you before we started the interview. When you first asked me to come on, I promised you a great Chicago Cubs story. A couple of years ago, the Rays were on a road trip, and we started in Pittsburgh, and our middle series of that road trip was over July 4th weekend against the Chicago Cubs. And it was, I want to say, 2 seasons after Joe Maddon left the Rays and went to take the manager's job at the Cubs. I had been with Joe for his final season in Tampa Bay, so I got to know him just a little bit. But the thing that he and I bonded about was both of our mutual love of music and specific kinds of music. So here's a little peek behind the curtain for you, Noah. In Joe Maddon's office when he was with the Rays, I can't speak for when he was at Wrigley with the Cubs, but he had a framed album cover of Bruce Springsteen. And I am a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. So he and I bonded over that. And when I got to revisit with Joe a couple seasons later on that road trip that I was telling you about, we were on the field, we come over, we exchange pleasantries, a bro hug and a picture taken and all that. And my first question to him had nothing to do with baseball. It was about music. I said, have you seen Bruce Springsteen on Broadway yet? And he said, obviously not. I'm in the middle of a baseball season, but I'd love to go see it. And then he said to me, it's funny you mentioned music because I just got a text from Eddie Vedder. And I'm sure you know Eddie Vedder, the lead singer of Pearl Jam. And I said, oh, that's great. What did Eddie say? He said, well, he and I are in constant contact. He likes to know what our lineup is before every game. So before I leave my office and go out to the field, I text Eddie Vedder what our lineup is for that particular game. And of course, that just blew my mind. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
That Joe Maddon and Eddie Vedder are texting each other before a game. Like, you would think it would be, he would be completely dialed in, focused on the game at hand. Here he is, vintage Joe Maddon, taking the opportunity to text Eddie Vedder, a lifelong Cubs fan like yourself, and texting him what the lineup of that Cubs game is going to be. I just thought that was monumentally cool.
So, part of being a sportscaster, you get to witness some great moments. I, as a fan, went to a Cubs vs. Rays games at Tampa Bay in 2017, and they had like this little video to honor Joe because it was his return to Tampa. You get to witness many moments like this as a guy who covers them. What is it like being able to witness these moments, and what are some of your favorites?
Well, obviously I'll go to my most recent memory when the Rays clinched the playoffs in Toronto this past fall was really memorable because it was the first time that I've been a part of a playoff team. They hadn't made the playoffs since 2013. The year after that is when I came on board, and they hadn't made a playoff since. So that was really, really special. And then, of course, that whole playoff run was monumentally special as well. I got to watch. I wasn't in Oakland when they went out to Oakland and beat Oakland. And then losing the first 2 games to Houston and coming back to a packed house at Tropicana Field and watching them make a series of it and take those 2 games at Tropicana Field against the Astros was incredible to witness that. Knowing, again, going back to that story, being part of a team and feeling like you had something invested in that and watching that was really cool. But then, prior to my time with the Rays, I grew up in New Jersey, and I was literally a 20-minute drive without traffic to Yankee Stadium. And so my fondest baseball memories as a youngster was going to New York Yankees games. I still feel like a fan when I'm talking about these things. So my biggest moment as a sportscaster would be the playoff run from last year with the Rays. But I was in Yankee Stadium in 1998 when Tino Martinez hit a grand slam in Game 1, and they went on to sweep the San Diego Padres. And I feel like I could close my eyes and be there again at that moment. So those are the moments that I think really solidified that I was on the right path and wanted to be a part of that kind of excitement professionally as well as a fan. So, those 2 things kind of to me are go hand in hand. My greatest moments as a sportscaster make me feel like a fan, and my greatest moments as a fan make me like I made the right choice to be a sportscaster.
So you also, so it's a lot like how you got to bond with Joe Madden over music. You get to see these guys that we watch on TV behind the scenes. What are some fun stories you have with some players, other coaches? And I remember like Chris Archer, huge personality for the Rays. What are some moments like that you are quite fond of?
Well, one of the cool things about working at ESPN, going back to my college basketball job, is getting to work side by side with some people who are former coaches and are former players, and now we're peers, we're colleagues, and we become friends, and they become family members to me. And one of the first that comes to mind is LaFonso Ellis. Now, you're too young to know about LaFonso Ellis, the basketball player, but I encourage you to go back on YouTube and look up some of his clips. He was a beast in college. He went to Notre Dame, had a long NBA career, but I remember as a freshman at Syracuse, and Fonz and I are about the same age, he was a sophomore at Notre Dame, and they came up to the Carrier Dome and beat us on a buzzer beater.
Oh.
And I remember thinking at that time, like, oh man, I hate that guy. He killed us. And now he's become one of my dearest, closest friends. I've called a number of games with him. And this past year was his first year as a member of College Game Day, along with Reese Davis and of course, Seth Greenberg and Jay Billis. So he's reached the pinnacle. And I couldn't be prouder of him. I think of him as a brother now. But being able to work alongside guys like that, and someone who I work with a lot calling Big 12 games, Fran Fraschilla. I remember Fran when he was the head coach at Manhattan College and then St. John's University. And now I joke with him, he's kind of the dean of Big 12 broadcasting. He's covered Big 12 basketball now for, I think it's close to 20 years. And there's nobody better about it. And here I am peeking over to my right, and I'm sitting next to Fran calling Big 12 basketball games like Boog Shambi does on a lot of Monday nights. So that's really the coolest thing for me, is having watched certain players and certain coaches through the years, and now calling them my friends and calling them my colleagues. That's the biggest thrill for me to have at this job right now.
That was a funny story there, because that's another one that actually involves one of my favorite teams. My dad's side, big Notre Dame people. My mom's side, Iowa.
No way.
I'm Notre Dame and Iowa fans. So that was really cool to get to hear about that. So what is your favorite sport that you get to cover and broadcast?
You know, I would say for a couple of reasons, college basketball is my passion. Because I played basketball more than I played baseball. I gave up baseball in 8th grade because when I went to high school, I also played tennis. And those two sports in New Jersey, at least, are played at the same time. So I had to make a choice, and I chose tennis over baseball. But basketball, I played all my life. And I went to Syracuse, obviously, because of the broadcasting, but also because of their basketball tradition. So I would say calling college games is my favorite if I had to choose, if only because of the sport, and then because I have the best seat in the house and I'm getting paid for it. Sitting at center court for a big-time game, or, as we talked about earlier, even a small conference game in a gym with only a few hundred people, it's still, once that ball gets tipped, you see on the faces of the players and the coaches how important it is to them. And that has sort of a carryover effect onto as a sportscaster, that you feel that intensity and you feel that passion and you feel how important it is to them, and therefore it becomes that important to you. So I've been very blessed and lucky for the last 10 years to be able to do that from the beginning of November all the way through the middle or the end of March, in different gyms around the country, getting to travel to places that I never thought I'd get to travel to, and meet a whole lot of really impressive and influential people along the way.
So I can really relate to you with that. Like, I got to cover high school basketball, as you know, since you looked into me this past winter, and that is just it's so fun when you're just down there and you can see that, and it makes you feel like you're a part of the game. It's really amazing. So now I got three just fun questions to finish out the interview here. They're would you rathers. So you up for it?
I'm up for it.
All right. So the first one is, would you rather watch an NBA or college basketball game?
Ooh. Can I give two answers?
Sure.
I'd rather watch a college basketball game if I was by myself. I would rather watch an NBA game with my two sons, because what I've learned, and I don't know, you tell me, it seems like the younger generation's really into the NBA. The older you get, that's when you get more into college basketball. Maybe it's because you go to college and then you have a real affiliation or a real loyalty to a team or something like that. But I know my two sons, Jason, who's a sophomore in high school, and Brian, who's going into 6th grade, they're really into NBA basketball. They play NBA 2K. They know all the teams. Every year we make a special road trip. Our goal is to go to a different city and see a different NBA game every year. So this year, obviously, we were supposed to go to DC and watch the Bucks play the Wizards, but that got canceled. So we'll have to try that next year. But we've done that every year for the last 4 years. So I would say with my son's NBA game. By myself, I'm a college guy.
I'm college all the way. I do play NBA 2K, but only so I can mod them into college teams. Like, I'm a Bulls fan, so I'm just kind of whatever right now. Chuck up a three, do a dunk. I mean, I'm just not into it that much, but it's still pretty fun to watch.
Kick my butt in NBA 2K, Noah.
So the second one is, would you rather eat Italian or Mexican food?
Italian or Mexican food? Give me Mexican every day and twice on Sunday. But if I had to only eat one or the other, I'm going Italian. Anything with melted cheese and sauce, I'm all about it. My favorite meal, if I had to choose a favorite meal, is chicken parmesan. So how can I say chicken parmesan is my favorite meal and not choose Italian food to eat all the rest of my life? So I'll go Italian.
And then the last one is, would you rather have the superpower to fly or go invisible whenever you want?
Wow. Fly or be invisible? I would say invisible, because I am on a plane a lot. I travel about 200 days a year when things are normal and we're not quarantined to whatever extent we are during this time. So flying, I know I could get on an airplane and fly, but being invisible is not something you could do every day, even if you had all the money in the world. So I would choose be invisible. And that's a pretty tough decision from a guy who makes a living in front of a camera wanting to be seen by everybody, but I'll choose invisible for that.
All right, so that's all I got for you. Thank you for taking the time to do this with me. I really appreciate it.
Noah, it was great talking to you. Anytime. I hope you stay in touch, and good luck with your career. You're already many, many steps ahead of when I was your age.
Thank you. I will definitely stay in touch. So, yeah, that's all I got. And, yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care, man. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you, too. Bye.
So long.